Thank you for watching Truth and Justice with Vivian King. I'm your host, Vivian King, where we're going to seek the truth about the criminal justice system in Harris County. We're going to explore a very interesting case that's been all over the news this year because the trial started in January of 2012. And we're going to explore what makes a child kill. There was a famous case that happened, and I have the lawyer that tried that case in the studio with me today. Her name is Windi Akins Pastorini. She's a famous local lawyer, and she's going to tell us about what happened with the case. Also in the studio, I have Carey, Wellmaker. She is Windi's investigator in this case. She's a private investigator, and she worked on this case. I'm going to start right away with Windi. Now, just like every other Wednesday, you're welcome to call in and ask your questions about what happened, where we try to educate you about the criminal justice system and entertain you a little bit also. So, Windi, I'm going to turn straight to you and introduce yourself for the people watching and tell us a little bit about your case.
Well, you've already introduced me, and I just want to say thank you so much for having me here. I'm happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to talking to some of your call-in people.
Okay.
This case was an interesting case. It happened 3 years ago when my client was 12. And one morning, on a day when it was a rain-out day, there was no school, she was home with her father, and she took a gun from between the mattress of her father's bed as her father lay sleeping, and she shot him in the back of the head and killed him. There is so much more to that story than she shot him. But the question that everyone asks me every time we talk about this case is, what did he do to cause that? He must have done something. And that's true. Children just don't wake up one day and say, I think I'm going to kill my parent. And in this case, he had sole custody of this young girl and had sole custody for the previous 6 years. And let's just say those were 6 years of hell for that little girl, and mostly physical abuse. But as her body blossomed into a young lady, it became sexual abuse as well. And she had turned to teachers to no avail. She had turned to her stepmother, who turned a blind eye to what was going on. The school called CPS. They didn't do anything, and there was an open CPS case at the time she shot him. And she turned to the school people, and they'd want to help her because they could see she was upset, but the police would come and tell her she had to leave with her dad, and she did. And 1 month after reporting the case to CPS and asking the school, please don't let her go home with her father, she's afraid, this incident happened.
Wow. Tell me how you got involved with this incident.
Well, I got a call from a former client's friend and asked me if I could come to the police station, and told me what had happened. And I raced over there, and I spent the next 4 hours trying to see my client, who they had interviewing, but they wouldn't allow me to be there.
Tell the viewers about 12-year-olds when they're interviewed. What is the process for the police to interview a 12-year-old?
Well, the law, unlike adults, the law requires different things, and things that are basically designed to make the child more comfortable and to make the truth more likely to come out. But in this case, the police refused to let the stepmother in to see her, although she asked for the stepmother. And at 12 years old, she had no idea that she had a lawyer, but they're entitled to have their lawyer. And I wore out I'd say the linoleum in front of the desk there, trying to be able to get in to see her. And fortunately, she actually gave 2 statements that, and they were both suppressed by the judge in this case because her rights were violated. And
now, when you say she gave 2 statements, were they both at the police station when they gave it? I mean, it was like one statement she gave and it wasn't good enough, so they made her give a second statement, or, I mean, tell us about that.
It was pretty interesting. One of the requirements for a juvenile statement is that it be recorded from the beginning to the end, and even the admonishments by the magistrate that she has a right to remain silent and things such as that, all of that has to be recorded. So they took the first statement, and close to the end of the statement, the tape broke.
Oh, okay.
So they had to bring the magistrate back in, admonish her again, and took a second statement. And this one was thrown out because she's not allowed to have either her stepmother nor her lawyer there with her, which is what she's entitled to.
Okay. So a juvenile, unlike an adult, is entitled to have their lawyer present, or their mother present, or their father present.
Or both.
Now, are the authorities supposed to contact the adult, like the mother or the father, or does the child have to say they want that person? Do you know what the state of the law is right now? I know it's always changing, but...
Good question. I don't know exactly what the status of the law is right now, but the statute says that a child is entitled, and that's the word they use, entitled to have an attorney and a parent present at the time they give the statement. So it's just whatever the courts have defined entitled to mean.
And certainly in this case, since you were there knocking on the door saying, let me in, you were there to assist your client, and the stepmother was there.
Correct. And I didn't get close enough to knock on the door to say, let me in, but I was at the front desk saying, what is your name? And have you told them that I'm here? And, it's been 20 minutes. I'd like to know why they're not allowing me to see my client. And this went on for several hours. And the police department thought that were pretty funny. They ended up taking her downtown to the juvenile detention center and never even told the stepmother nor I that she was no longer even in the building. I mean, that was the police department played what I believe to be some very silly games with the life of this child.
I agree with you on that. Now, I think that's interesting. You said the stepmother was there with you, but yet her husband maybe was dying. Tell us about that.
Well, he was shot in the back of the head and life-flighted to a hospital. He didn't die right away, but he didn't ever regain consciousness. He was at the hospital for about, I want to say, 6 or 7 hours before word came that they wanted to essentially pull the plug on the life support. And she was still with me. The stepmother was still with me at the police department waiting to try to see the child. When her father called me and talked to me on the phone and said, you've got to make her leave. They're about to pull the plug. She's got to go now. Make her leave. So this lady that I barely knew, I urged to go, and between her father and myself and our urging, she went to the hospital, and he died later that evening.
Did you have any sense of that? That just seems interesting. You don't know, should I go with my stepdaughter who's being interrogated, or should I go with my husband who's dying? And she chose to be there with her stepdaughter. I mean, that seems like a real noble thing to do, but I think 3 years later, as the trial goes on, she changes. Isn't that correct?
That is correct. It seemed like a noble thing to do, but I think she knew in her secret heart of hearts that something horrible had to have happened that morning for this child. He was an all-A student, played team sports, had never been disciplined by a teacher or the principal, was a joy to have in their classes. What would cause a child to do that? And I want to say another shout out to her on the other point is that in the 3 years that followed, she was never a discipline problem, made straight A's, continued to play team sports, and is just a wonderful child.
Who kept her after her father died?
Well, that's interesting too. Her stepmother fought for custody of her. The father had been the sole managing conservator, having sole custody of the little girl, and for the preceding 6 years because he alleged that the mother, the biological mother, was unfit. So when they actually pulled the plug on this situation, the stepmother fought for custody of her and got custody of her for about 6 months. And at the end of 6 months, she let her go live with her biological mother for reasons known only to her. I was surprised because that was total opposite of what she felt and what she wanted at the beginning of this thing. But 6 months had gone by, and I think that she...
Had the insurance claim been paid?
That's a good point. I'm glad you said it and I didn't.
I'm just asking. I'm just the host asking questions.
Right. No, that's always been my thought. There had to be some financial incentive for her to want to keep that child for only 6 months.
Because there was a life insurance policy, wasn't there?
It turns
Did that
out,
come out in trial?
no, they kept that out. But there was a life insurance policy, and actually there were 2 life insurance policies on the life of the man who died. One was payable to the mother of his mother, not her mother, but his mother, and the other was paid to the stepmother. And then, the child went to live with the biological mother. I've always wondered that, Vivian. I don't know the answer to it, but it was very unusual to fight that hard to get custody of that child, and when you do, it's 6 months later, let her go live with the person you fought for custody from.
And you won.
Yeah.
She won custody from the biological mother.
Correct.
And then she lets her go live with her mother.
Yeah.
Very strange. Also in the studio, we have Carey Wellmaker, who was the investigator who assisted Windi. Tell me what was interesting about your investigation, Carey.
I think the interesting part is that there were a wealth of witnesses that came forward to support our client. Parents and children, especially the children, they felt very strongly that they wanted to say what they had seen and what they had observed. They were very open, and it's a pleasure to interview as an investigator children because they are very honest and they're very descriptive. The mind of a child is an amazing thing. The nice part about that too is that the children that did come forward had complete support from their parents. I think there was only one parent that just shut us down and would not participate, which kind of surprised me because for a 12-year-old to do what she did, you've got to think as everyone does, what in the world could have happened to that 12-year-old. But at the same time, you have to think like a 12-year-old.
And what type of things did you find were going on in that 12-year-old's mind?
Things that were going on that the children told us were they had seen marks, bruises. She had told them about whippings. Her father would never let her ever spend the night. He always knew where she was. She would panic when she would hear his voice calling her to come home and she was only down the street. She had a very regimented, disciplined life. And the other children didn't understand that because they had more freedom. But she was, our client was always worried that she wasn't going to make it home on time, that something was going to happen, and she wouldn't adhere to the rules that she had been given.
Was your client ever afraid or explaining the bruises that she had to the other kids? Did they have opinions about it, or had she shared it with them?
Well, that's funny. Abuse is very humiliating to a child. And when you're around other children that have wonderful parents in their mind, you don't want to portray that you don't have wonderful parents too. So she had built up this, horrendous feeling of, that she couldn't portray to the other kids. But but the kids could feel it and they could see it, and she would talk about it some. And they knew it was worse than it probably was, but at the same time, they didn't want to make her feel uncomfortable as well. So once it happened, they wanted to come out and tell what they had seen. And as a matter of fact, two of the girls went to the police station after they heard what happened so that they could tell what they had seen to help their friend relay what they believed was going on behind closed doors.
And that takes a lot of courage for a child to do that.
It's very hard to prove these cases. Sexual and physical abusers don't do it publicly because they know if they do it publicly, they'll go to jail. And so for an investigator and attorneys, it's very hard to get factual evidence that you can use in court. A lot of it is considered hearsay in the criminal courts. And a lot of people out there don't understand that. And so they don't understand why they can't tell their story because they've either seen it or they've felt it, but they didn't really have the actual physical evidence to provide to show that it was actually occurring. It's very frustrating to the witnesses.
Who do you think the top 3 witnesses are that you found to aid in this case?
Well, I believe that the top 3, one was a little girl that spent a lot of time with our client, and she actually came forward and went to the police station with her mother, and the police wouldn't even take her, they wouldn't take her statement. They weren't interested in what she had to say.
How'd you find her?
We found her because we had found another witness that had also come forward with her. They had actually ran into each other at the police station, and she told us about her and had mentioned it in her statement. And so then I had to do various searches, and they had moved several times, and we finally found them. And I remember when I first got in touch with her mother, because I always contact the parents when you're dealing with children, because you want to give them the opportunity to agree to you being able to talk to their child. And she got very tearful because she felt very strongly about it, because her daughter was so emotional when she heard about what had happened to our client. And she started crying and saying that she knew it had been going on, and she felt a little bit guilty because she hadn't come forward, but at the same time she was respecting our client's wishes and not telling anyone.
Wow.
Another witness was actually the child's father's ex-girlfriend, who was the mother to his second child.
Can you hold that thought for a moment? Caller, you're on.
Yeah, how you doing, Miss Keenan?
I'm fine. How are you?
Doing great. I have a question about the case that you're all speaking of,
Yes, sir.
and it's concerning the stepmother. And it's the young lady, like it was the news media saying, and then your guest, that the little girl was being molested, and and all this. Did the stepmom not know this?
We will have to speculate as to what her thoughts are. Wendy, what's your thoughts? Do you think that the stepmother knew?
Well, let me just say, how do you live in a house for 5.5 years where abuse is taking place and not have some idea, if not actual knowledge, that abuse was taking place? There was one example that was relayed in court that was a huge sign of sexual abuse, but she had many signs of physical abuse. The stepmother testified she saw the whelps on the back of the child, and the child had showed her the back from a beating she got. And this is the bad part about some people who want to turn their head. This little girl had also had a busted lip, and I asked her on the witness stand, I said, didn't she one time after a beating have a busted lip? And she said, well, that was an accident. And I said, an accident? And she said, well, yes, he was trying to discipline her, and she was trying to get away, and her lip got busted. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you see and you know what's going on, but yet you act there's a logical explanation for this, and there's not.
And I agree. Caller, and a mom in a household, especially a stepmom. Now, you remember the dynamics. It's a stepmother, it's the natural father, and, the natural child. So the stepmother might like her lifestyle. If she does know, she has a duty to report it. So she's in a quandary. Is she going to report it? And then her lifestyle is going to change because the man, the head of the household, or the contributor, she's going to have to divorce him and make some serious decisions. Or is it easier to just turn your back? But if she reports it, then her whole lifestyle changes. But she's supposed to report it. So she can never, ever say she knew it, even on the witness stand, because it's a crime for an adult to live in a household and know a child's being abused and not report it. Do you have any other questions, caller?
No, that was it.
Thank you, and keep watching. If you have another call, call us back.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a good question, especially coming from a man.
Oh,
that,
yes, absolutely.
Did the wife realize it? But, we as women believe she did. But
Well,
we don't know.
We also got her to say on the witness stand, now this remembers the lady who initially hired me, and that was until she found out what had happened to cause her stepdaughter to do what she did, and then she lost interest in paying the fee, I guess you'd say. But she did say that she knew that my client had had marks on her back. She knew, and she could hear the screams of my client when she would be disciplined in private in this room that he would take her into always, never, never, ever in front of the stepmom. But she could hear the screams, she could see the crying, she could see the marks. And why didn't she report it? And I think it's just like you said. Maybe she didn't want her lifestyle to change. Maybe she didn't want to believe what she was seeing. There's just,
especially when it comes to the sexual abuse part of it. I think in a lot of black households, there's a lot of spanking. I think that, I don't know if it gets that far. I mean, because that is abuse and beating. I think by all standards, black or white or Hispanic. But you would think that she would intercede at some point. I know if I was in a household with a child getting beat and I thought it was excessive, I would intervene personally. I mean,
Absolutely.
I'm just that type of person. I would intervene. We can't say why, but it did intervene for the spankings, then she wasn't going to intervene for any sexual abuse.
That's right.
Because she'd have to be prepared to walk out and disrupt her household. And it would be a crime, like we said before. So
I think a lot of women, too, if they hear about sexual abuse, because I've worked several of these cases, and the mothers tend to want to turn, to look away, because it also says something about them. And they internalize it when they really shouldn't. It's not about them. Sexual abuse is not about that.
And some women, do you think that some women might think that I couldn't satisfy my man, so he had to turn to the child?
Yes.
And so they play like they don't see the signs that the man is turning to the child.
Right.
And which hurts the child because the child doesn't feel protected then.
Right. And the man's not doing that because of that reason. Sexual abuse is a power issue, and it's abuse. And too many women don't understand that, and they take it as a personal, insult.
I've also had a man tell me once, actually a lawyer, that told me that sometimes men do things and women don't understand it just because, the breasts might be forming, the girls are developing, and it's not about the wife. They might love them, but it's just that other thing that men do.
Right. Exactly.
Let me take this call. Caller, you're on.
Yes, good morning. How you doing, Miss King and your guest?
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing fine. I'm just calling to let you know that I was tuned in, and I support you. And I appreciate what you're doing, bringing this forum to us every week and sharing all this information with us.
You learning anything about juvenile law tonight?
Yes. Yes, of course.
Okay, well, keep watching, and thank you for supporting us. If you have anything else, you want to say anything about this topic? What do you think about the child, the 12-year-old, killing her dad because of what was going on with her?
I think it's very unfortunate, and I think somebody should intervene before it got that far.
I agree.
Maybe some of the teachers, administrators at the school, even the stepmother. And then just for the give her back to the mother after 6 months after getting the money, it shows a lack of integrity on her part.
I agree.
And I'm on your Facebook page too, and like I said, I support you. I voted for you. I appreciate the show.
Thank you, young man. Keep watching, please. Every Wednesday at 6:30. I appreciate you.
All right, I think I will.
All right, sweetie. Bye-bye. So one of the things, Carey, you were saying is you found those two witnesses, and then we talked, before we got on the air, we talked about the most important witness. So talk about that.
I believe, and I think Windi would agree, that one of the most important witnesses was the baby's, what we consider today the baby's mama of his second child. When she had her child, she felt compelled because
Tell us a little bit about her so the viewers don't get
It was actually her
nervous.
first child.
Was
his
it
first
her,
child.
oh, his first
His
child?
first child.
Okay.
The dead man's
My
first.
client,
Yeah, go ahead.
Our client was the second
right.
child of
That's right.
of the deceased.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Well, Windi, go ahead and talk
Yeah,
about.
no,
well, I mean, you know more about her personally. I just know about how we found her.
Well, you were the one who found her.
Well,
Well, tell us how you found it. There was an
'cause
important witness.
It was
and
a very,
Windi will tell us about the witness, but let's talk about how Carey found her.
Well,
This
she
is
dated
the
him
dead
in high
man's
school.
First woman that he ran off basically because of his physical abuse. But
right.
you found her.
She dated him in high school, and then she got pregnant, and she had the baby, and he became violent, just as if physical violent, dangerous in her mind, to the point that she fled the state and she went into hiding. And she stayed in hiding, what was it?
Ever since.
Yeah, ever since, until I contacted her. And she was real difficult to get in contact with, because every time I would just about get there, she would disappear again, and we would look for her again.
How long did it take you to find her?
I want to say it took me 4 to 6 months. Maybe 4 months, because I just remember Windi constantly calling me going, have you found her yet? Because she was such an important witness. And I'm like, I'm trying, but she lived out of state. And of course, I can't travel out of state on the budget that we had. So I had to become very resourceful, and I used the databases, and I would track her, and then I finally found a neighborhood where she was residing in, and I looked up the neighbors and contacted one of the neighbors and asked them if they could please go over and explain to her why I was trying to get in contact. And luckily, that neighbor responded to me, believed me, and agreed to do that. And within probably an hour, I got a phone call. And at that point, you could hear the relief in her voice when I explained to her that this is why we needed to get in touch with her.
And he's dead.
And he's dead. And she said she had seen it on the internet, and that they had always wanted, her and her daughter had always wanted to contact
Your client.
the client, because she was a family member to her daughter. You know, she's a half-sister, I guess a half-sister. And she said that they were just still so afraid because they didn't know if some, you know, the grandmother would get in touch with them.
Do you mind if I take a call?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Caller, thanks for calling. You're on.
Yes, I'm calling. I'm kind of wondering about where do we go from here. I mean, the girl obviously suffered a lot. She went through a lot. What happens to her now? I mean, she was acquitted criminally, but what about other consequences of this happening? And
We have a really good story. Windi has a really good story to tell about that. I was going. You're making us go all the way to the end already, Mr. Stamper. But we'll talk about that for a moment. Go ahead, Windi. Go ahead and tell you about that. He's saying what happens to the girl now that she's been acquitted. Well, it was a great story about the foreperson of the grand jury. People are trying to get resources for. But Windi, tell us a little bit about how God works in mysterious ways.
Well, the foreman of the grand jury, the foreman of the jury, not the grand jury, is a lady who, since the verdict, has taken a very active role to try to make sure that my client gets things that she needs and has needed for years, and not the least of which is help. And by that I mean psychological help. One of the expert witnesses in our case that testified has offered to treat her for free to help her work through this. And the foreperson of the jury is really going to make sure that the right things happen in my client's life. I mean, she's obviously a trained child advocate, and she's I couldn't be more impressed with all the work she's done to try to make sure that this little girl, who's now 15, gets the things that she needs that she may not have been getting for the last couple of years.
Right.
But I do want to say again to her about that is that she still, even in the face of all that, my client still made great grades, was never a discipline problem, played team sports, and is just this sweet, charming child.
And we do worry about her because now, as I understand it, she's living with her mother, or living in the environment that she really never lived in, because from the time she was 3, it appears she lived with her father and stepmother, and then lived with the stepmother after her father died, and now she lives with her mother, who she really wasn't supposed to be living with, or maybe wasn't as fit as she could have been.
Let's just say
we're trying to be delicate about it because we don't want to say anything negative, but the courts had found that the mother wasn't fit.
At one point, that was several years ago, and I think for a lot of reasons, not the least of which her 5-year-old daughter was taken away from her. I mean, the mother has issues that
certainly won't help the child now. I mean, wouldn't have helped her then, and certainly can't help her with this delicate mental state that she might be in.
Well, I will say this because I don't want to malign her too much or say a bunch of bad things about her, but it's obvious that the biological mother loves her daughter very much, and to the best of her ability does what she can to be a good mother. And the fact that these 3 years have gone by, and the client is still doing well in school, perfect attendance or almost perfect, and it says a lot about her, but there are issues that I think need to be addressed, and it's not my forte. I don't do that kind of legal work, but fortunately, like I said, that the foreperson of the jury is taken up
child
that as a
advocate.
charge.
Yeah, so that's good. Do you have any other comments?
I do, because this was a very interesting case, and I tried my best to follow it through media and other avenues, and obviously, I'm seeing one side of it, but it was very obvious that there was a tremendous investigation that went into this. There was tremendous talent, legally speaking, and the opportunities that the poor little girl was given just by the team that was surrounding her. Going forward, what does that say about the people that are in prison that maybe didn't have those resources? Do you feel that this would have been the same outcome had Vivian King or Windi Akins not been on the team, or Carey Wellmaker not been able to exhaust her resources?
I do think there's a big divide in the criminal justice system where between the money to finance a case like this. I mean, Windi took this as one of her pet projects and worked with this child and gave her something that she'll never realize what she got maybe until 30 years from now. I mean, she doesn't understand that she got, a very trained, experienced, seasoned professional that any of us would love to have represent us. And the same thing with Carey and Windi. You assembled a whole team. Tell us about other people that you had involved in this case. You had like 2 or 3 other lawyers involved, didn't you?
We had 2 off and on. There were over the 3 years. There were different lawyers who stepped up and did some
and
things.
Experts.
But I want to say that the judge in this case was so generous. He gave us any expert that I asked for. He gave us. I was able to get a private investigator in Carey. I got Gina Vitale, who is a mitigation specialist, to work with us. George Glass, Dr. George Glass, a psychiatrist, worked with us. Dr. Toby Myers worked with us. An assortment of lawyers, and I'm not trying to think. I know I'm leaving somebody out, but people that just our staff from the office that came there every day and assembled all kinds of things. And my law partner, Sun Tran, and Troy Bollinger, and Winston Cochran, people that just gave of their time to try to make sure all I's were dotted and T's were crossed. And Vivian, to some extent, I think we kicked around ideas at our office.
Right, and what impressed me so much is, Windi is a very seasoned professional. She's been around a long time, and this was a poor little black girl that Windi took on, and the dynamics of that was always so appealing to me and kind of heart-wrenching to me that you would take on such a project like that, because she's not from your world. She doesn't look like you. I mean, you're a part of this world. I mean, you do encompass the whole world. But I'm just saying from the surface. Well, from the surface. Internally, I know you because I know you personally. But I'm just saying from the surface, it wouldn't look like it. It would look like how can this little poor black girl afford this expensive team? Of lawyers. What do you want to say about that?
Good point that he makes and he's asking about is that this was an appointed case. And what's real critical, I think, and I spend a lot of time in the jails, is that our job is colorless.
Right.
I mean, it really is. It doesn't matter what color you are. What matters is, are there facts out there? Is there evidence that's out there that hasn't been revealed? And attorneys like Windi who fight for that and actually plead to the judge and say, we need more funds because we believe that there is evidence out there, but we've got to have we've got to have the funds to get that evidence to be presented in court. And I think a lot of people in the jails believe that appointed attorneys don't do a good job. And I don't believe that.
I agree,
work for a lot of attorneys.
And I'm glad that the people are seeing this, that watch this show, because I'm doing this show as my community service for the urban community to learn more about it. And these great lawyers and investigators can be appointed or they can be retained. I mean, but the issue is we all care. We care whether you're black or white, Hispanic, Asian. We care. And sometimes we need to talk about this and have that conversation in our community, because we want to line things up black and white and Hispanic and Asian too much. And we fight for everybody. And this is a good example of the team that fought for this little girl. And obviously to protect her privacy, even though maybe it was out during the news media, we're not saying her name. That's why we keep referring to our client. But do you have any other comments before we take another call?
Actually, one of the people that I'm close to is got a really good question. He's actually a law student, and he's very curious about how a self-defense argument fits so squarely with the facts of this case. Maybe he could say it better.
Okay, put him on. Hello? Hello?
Yes. The particular question is, when you have a self-defense, you immediately think of someone charging after you. The facts here were a little different, and Anthony, who's sitting beside me, would like to know more about, how that interplays with a self-defense in the real life context.
All right, we're going to get to that question next, and thank you for calling. Okay, so tell us about that, Windi. Now, this was a case of, tell me what the actual jury verdict was and explain how you got there.
Well, the jury verdict was an acquittal based on self-defense, or a not guilty based on self-defense. And it was kind of a reach in some people's mind to accept that somebody can shoot somebody who's sleeping in the back of the head
and not testify. Let's tell the viewers that. I mean, the child did not testify. So generally in a self-defense case, if I'm the defendant, or let's just say I'm a lawyer, but I'm going to put my client on to explain why he did what he did. And jurors want to know, how can they make the leap that someone's defending themselves without them explaining it? So the beauty and the talent of Windi comes in when you know that the client did not testify and she's having to prove self-defense. So tell us how you did that miraculous feat.
Well, thank you for saying that. But the law allows, in cases of abuse, to show the history of the deceased and the accused person. And in this case, there was a lot of little evidence that we could showing the prior relationship of the parties. But the big thing was that you have to you view what takes place through the eyes of the person who's defending themselves in a case like this.
So that's a 12-year-old in this case.
That's a 12-year-old. In this case, the jury was asked to view the facts, not as you would if you were, a 40-year-old man and.
They're fussing at me to take a call. Can you hold that?
Go ahead. Sure.
Caller, you're on.
Hi, yes, I was just calling to say thank you guys for what you all are doing for individuals that are less fortunate.
Thank you for saying that, caller. Have you watched the show before?
This is my first time watching the show, and it is awesome. I mean, so basically what I'm seeing is that when individuals are faced with this type of abuse, sometimes, I'll just say for me, I was in a relationship with a man that had children, and I was sensing something to that effect as well. And there was no one for this girl, no one that she can reach out to. So I would say thank you to each and every one of you guys that stepped up when she needed you guys most. She really needed this, and I mean, it's unfortunate what she had to do to protect herself. But again, thank you guys for helping her.
I'd like to talk about one thing that goes along with what the caller is asking, and that is how are children able to tell? And I don't mean just children. Children and other abused family members, whether it's the mother or the father or whatever. How do people get abuse out there? And in adults, we have all kinds of resources that we can tap into, and hopefully we do. But for a child, the child doesn't have those resources. And what I think we could best do for kids that I learned from this case is what you need to do is tell your kids, if somebody ever touches you in a private place, tell me, or tell somebody, tell me, tell whomever. And they ought to be reassured by grandparents and aunts and uncles and things, that if anybody ever does that, you can count on me. If that happens, please tell me. Because a lot of these children suffer in silence because of the humiliation, but more importantly because of the fear of retribution or somebody paying them back for having told on them. And that's a valid concern. I had one person tell me, a police officer who talked to me after the case was over, who said he gave a speech one time at a school to about the age of my client, and said, if you're ever touched or physically abused or whatever, you need to report it to somebody. And he said within a week he had a letter at his office from a person who was being physically and sexually abused, and he got his resources right on it, and she was removed from the place where she was, and she was protected, and he said that's one of his proudest moments. And we all want to help children.
We do. And thank you for sharing your testimonial about what's happening in a situation that you were in. But we do have to protect children, and they need to know that they can count on us. And sometimes listening, hugging, sometimes children might even be confused as to exactly what happened if it's sexual. Because some touches might not be sexual like the kids think. I mean, it goes both ways, but we need to be slow to judge, quick to listen, and to love and to care, because you have time to investigate things if you pull kids out of a situation in a loving environment. What concerns me a lot of times is you take a kid out of a loving environment, you put them in CPS where people hate them. You know, if you can always put them with another family member that cares about them, because people need that, children need that continuity of love and concern. And one of the reasons why they're afraid, not only of their abuser, but they're afraid to be responsible for the change of the lifestyle, because people have to break up, and kids don't want to be responsible for that. So somehow we have to love them and let them know we love them in spite of that. Thank you so much for calling in.
I think that makes another good point, though, too, is sometimes, and I commend her for being so brave if she did take action on that. But at the same time, I think people need to understand if it's physical abuse, there's a lot of educational programs out there that they can take advantage of, that's either through the internet or there's all kinds of resources.
Because some physical abusers
don't even understand.
They don't understand it. Like in the black community, it's like, I was beat, so I'm going to beat you.
Right.
Well, that might happen, and maybe you shouldn't be so quick to, because you have a right to discipline your child with force, but maybe you do need some classes, and your child needs to take some classes.
I've had examples.
And not necessarily take them out of the home to disrupt it, but because sometimes when parents are spanking, they do care. Some are just mean and drunk and foolish.
Right.
Okay, well, they're going to hurt them.
They're abusers.
They're abusers.
Yes.
But others are kind of screwed up psychologically themselves, so sometimes we do need to give the abuser or offer them help.
Exactly. They repeat what they've learned from their parents or from their grandparents.
But it sounds like this dude in this case we're dealing with was an abuser. He was a real abuser, and if he had to run a lady out of town, he was a criminal.
Absolutely.
Well, this lady was so in tune to what was going on that when she left, her baby was only 4 months old. She took the baby and left, and she said one of the places she lived, she's an attractive lady, and she said she was working, I think, as a waitress at the time, and she's now a nurse. I want to put herself through school. She's a great lady. But she said she was working as a server or waitress, and when she got to the work one day, her boss said, "Oh, there's a guy that's been by here looking for you," and described him. And she said, "Okay, just a second, I got to get something out of my car." And she went and got in her car, left, went home, took the child, and packed up and moved that very minute.
Wow.
And
that shows that man, that their client should be assured or reassured that what she did was bad, but it was the only thing a 12-year-old knew to do, because she was protecting herself. The violence was that real. If there's a grown person running from city to city, and when you find out where they are, they're going to go and clean out their place. That's like a movie. Most people are not going to do that. That means that he was a violent, mean individual.
And this 12-year-old didn't have those means.
She couldn't get in a car and drive.
She couldn't just pack up and leave.
She couldn't go get another job.
Right.
You know, her stepmother's there, who's going to be on his side because she's kind of an outsider. You know, it's kind of awkward when there's a child. We have one more call. We have another call. Caller, you're on. Thank you for calling. Oops. I was too late. Sorry, they'd been on for a while. Let me try again. Caller, you there? Hello, you there? Okay.
And one thing I just want to, y'all were talking about you've got a lot of outlets for physical abuse and for people you can talk to. The problem, though, is the sexual abuse. You don't see parents
You
or
can't talk about
or
that.
teachers saying that if you're being sexually abused, you need to report
right.
this. You don't, and there needs to be education in the schools and in the homes and in the churches that say it's not your fault. It's not your fault. You did nothing to cause this, and we can make it stop if you'll just trust us, and we promise we won't let you down. And you raise a good point. You know, sometimes you take a child out of its house. Where do you take it? If there's not a loving neighbor or friend or family to take over, it's very difficult to have a good place to put them, because some of the foster care is great and some of it is absolutely not great.
Well, and the biggest fear of a child is abandonment.
Yes.
I mean, they're so afraid that they'll be alone. And so they tend to tolerate things that they don't and shouldn't tolerate. And it's tragic because it makes them adults who are then, not stable, basically. And so, you've got to explain, like Wendy said, in the schools, that it's okay. It's not your fault. You didn't create this. Right. Many of the children I've spoken to feel like they did something to deserve what's being done to them. And it's tragic. It's sad.
One thing that my client told me is that I said, well, when you told your stepmother about, this physical abuse that she was aware of and has talked about, I said, what did she say? And she said, you want to go get some ice cream? I mean, that was her answer, and she said...
She just ignored it.
She just ignored it. Do you want to go get ice cream? And she said, and my client approached it one more time, and she said, well, you're 12. It's not going to be long till you'll be out of the house. Just deal with it.
Just deal with it. Wow.
That's
very
sad.
sad.
And
That's
she
very
couldn't deal
sad.
with it.
Very sad.
Well, she
couldn't
did.
deal with it. I mean,
She did for 6 years. I'm
Right.
telling you. And finally, enough is enough.
Well, I
it
think
just
she
shows that
really
she should have taken her to
believed.
counseling or something, even if the stepmother was afraid of him.
But she
should
really
have-
believed on that day she was imminently in danger.
Oh, I believe you. I
She
believe
did.
that.
She really believed he was
And
going
that's where
to
we left off, by you using
hurt her
psychiatrists
bad.
to prove self-defense.
Yeah, the self-defense aspect there. The law gives us a real boost for abused people to have who have to use self-defense to defend themselves that result in someone's death. You can show their relationship and what you knew about that person, whether or not you'd experienced it with them or not. Like, if you knew that let's say he didn't, but say you knew he killed his brother, that was something you knew. In this case, she knew that the mother of the first child had taken the child and was so concerned that she had left the state. So she had that kind of information in her mind. But the beauty of the law right now is that you talk to a healthcare professional, such as we had, a psychologist and a psychiatrist, and you tell them the things that have happened to you, and they can speak for you in court. They can repeat the things that you told them.
So what about the hearsay rule? We talked about that. Normally, if you repeat what someone said out of court, in court, for the truth of the matter, then that's hearsay. How did you get around hearsay with the expert?
Well, the statute, there's a special statute that allows for that in cases like this. Abuse cases are what this statute is really made for, and it allows hearsay to go to the state, that shows the state of mind of the accused, can be talked about in court as if it were the truth.
Wow.
That's
powerful.
It is powerful, and it allowed, in this case, this little girl who had so much trouble telling the story. I mean, would cry so hard when she would tell the story that the fact that she was able to tell the healthcare professionals that what had happened, and they, two independent, different, unrelated healthcare professionals, told the story that she told them, saved her from having to get on that witness stand and be traumatized one more time about this abuse. And one thing that just tore my heart out is she sat next to me during trial, and in the trial, when they would start to testify about the abuse, whether it was the stepmother or the healthcare professionals, she would start crying so loud that I could barely hear the witness, and she, and it was you can tell it came from the bottom of her heart, and it was gut-wrenching what she'd been through for those 6 years.
And another thing in juvenile cases, the mother can be in there with the defendant who is the child. So in this case, her biological mother sat with her, didn't she?
Has to be.
Has to be there,
They have to
right.
have a guardian with them.
Right. So while she's sitting there, that's unlike a normal, an adult trial. So her mother, while she's boo-hooing and crying, is her mother there to comfort her?
Yes, and to her credit, to the mother's credit, she was very good about the comforting aspect. She coped with it. She dealt with it. She was very nurturing. And, every time that we took a break after that, there were people that would just come up and hug her and want to tell her that they love her and that it's going to be okay now. And
how did you do emotionally? We have about 10 more minutes. We're going to start wrapping it up. I mean, that sounds like, that was just an emotional day every day for a month. I mean, you were in this trial for a month.
For a month and a week.
Oh, my God.
I mean, it was
grueling.
It was grueling, but the good thing for me is that I'd lived with it for 3 years, and I was ready for it, and because I knew what was going to take place. My poor client
had no idea,
I remember
no matter
one
how
time
much you explained it to her.
She was just crying so hard when the judge finally took a break and said, "I just want to go home. I just want to go home." And she says, "Can we just go home? Tell him I just need to go home." And tears streaming down her face, and she didn't understand she couldn't go home.
Yeah, when you're in a trial from 8 to 5, you can't go home. I mean, you have to be a part of this trial. You are here. They're trying to put you away. What was the maximum punishment this child could have gotten in the juvenile system?
I have to tell you this story because this is important. The maximum she could have gotten was 40 years in, adult prison.
Wow.
Up till she's 18, and then 18 transferred till the sum total of 40 is realized. But in this case, you always, as a lawyer, ask for an offer from the prosecution. In this case, I asked for the offer, and on the day of trial and the days leading up to trial, the offer was 30 years in prison.
For a 15-year-old.
For a 15-year-old.
That you've told the prosecution
30 days.
She's been abused.
And he didn't believe it. Now, he was about the fourth prosecutor, and none of them wanted to hear about it, just like the police department didn't want to hear from these girls that the mothers would bring to the police stations who didn't even, the mothers didn't even know my client because she was so isolated. My client was not allowed to visit in homes. Anyway, but the 30 years in prison out of a possible 40 was the offer on day 1, 2, and day 3. The prosecutor came to me and said, "Listen, if she'll plead to this, we'll give her probation."
So by day 3, most lawyers would have just taken the probation, but Windi said, and I officed with Windi, she was like, "Nope, I'm in too deep. This little girl didn't do it. She was justified. I'm with her. I'm not giving up on her," which is miraculous. Only the strong lawyers do that. A lot of them will fold. Because probation means she can just go home with her mother. And basically the courts will give her the resources she needs, like psychiatric help during the probation and things like that. But Windi said, and I'm a fighter. I fight for my clients to the end. But I got a little nervous when Windi said they gave her probation. I was like, "Ooh, Windi, are you sure? Maybe I need to do the probation." But Windi, what was your attitude?
Well, I believed so strongly in my case and in my client, and the good thing about it is you have to always convey these offers to your client. So I took her aside and said, "We got to talk," and I told her what had happened, and this was day 3, and she said, "Windi, I didn't intentionally and knowingly kill my dad like they're saying. I did it in self-defense, and I can't plead to that. I didn't do it that way, and you've always..." And fortunately or unfortunately, I'd educated her onto what the justification of self-defense was about, and she said, "I don't want the probation. I can't plead to that." And I said, "That's my opinion too, and let's keep going.
Let's do it. Let's do it."
Little did we know there'd be 4 more weeks of that.
Right. One of the great things, this has been in the news, all over the news, is that I was told that a couple of Sundays ago, the Houston Chronicle actually did an article just on the witness that Windi and Carey found, the witness that ran away. Apparently, they interviewed her and got deep into her story. And I haven't read the article, but apparently it was very good and compelling.
She was very amazing. She stayed throughout the whole trial, her and her husband.
So that means she took off her job.
She was working.
She didn't really know her stepdaughter, I guess, or whatever you want to call her.
They were very supportive and very supportive of Windi as well. It was something to see. I was impressed. You don't see that very often. She also had a step-grandfather that was very
Oh, yes.
He
Wonderful man.
he
We have 3
was
minutes.
he was amazing for her.
Well, wrap. You take your last minute and wrap up, and then I'm going to give you a minute, and then I'll try to take a few
Well, her
seconds.
step-grandfather, even though he had to also, with the dynamics of the family, he is the stepfather to her stepmother. And he was getting a lot of pressure. He still came forward for her, and we appreciate all of his input and his guidance. He's a reverend, and so he had a lot of insight that we couldn't bring in front of the court, but it motivated us to keep
sure did.
going. So.
Okay, Wendy. Well, you have about 2 minutes. I want you to just kind of wrap up the trial and fill in the blanks and try to wrap it up.
All I can say is, no, it was a labor of love. It was an ordeal, and it's such a relief to have it be over and having won.
People don't really understand when you're a trial lawyer how you live and breathe this case for 3 years like you did, but night and day. There's no rest for the weary because you're fighting the government, and the government has unlimited resources. So, talk about that. I mean, I'm in the office with her. I never saw her. I mean, she's up early in the morning. She's working late at night because once court is over, to make it be magical the next day, you have to stay up all night long to get your exhibits together. What exhibit do I need to change? They brought up this today. There's a lot that goes into that. You don't eat, sleep, write, or anything after that. So.
No, and it's except for the stress level and not having time to work out, it's great for getting into shape, because you don't eat, you really don't eat, and you don't sleep much either. That's the other bad part. But I just want to say it was a thrill and a pleasure to represent her, and it's a thrill and a pleasure to appear on your show. The one message I'd like to put out there is, just tell your children, if you're being touched in private places, please tell somebody that you trust. And the public needs to reassure our children, I'm one of those people you can trust.
That's true. I totally agree. We have 1 minute to wrap it up. What we've learned tonight is that tell our children. I have a 17-year-old daughter that I've told that a lot. I will remind her tonight, even though she's 17, she can still be touched in the wrong places. Even by boys her own age, and that we all have to be responsible and accountable. And in society, we have to pull together and be there for our children. And sometimes our children might lie or exaggerate. We have to be there even then and guide them the right way, because children make mistakes sometimes too.
And they misunderstand.
And they misunderstand, and they have misunderstandings. But we do have to be the adult and not use the criminal justice system in the wrong way, but try to use it in the right way. I hope that by us having this conversation and coming into your homes tonight, we've taught you something about the criminal justice system, about the juvenile system, about lawyers who are appointed or paid very little money who actually do care about our society. And there are people in jail who don't always have someone that cares. We need to care in this society. We need to know who our judges are. They had a great judge in this case. We need to vote and be a part of our criminal justice system. Thank you for watching Truth and Justice with Vivian King, where every week I will try to explore different cases and seek the truth and give you answers. Please call in, and thank you for watching tonight. Well, all right.